That I'll call the regular meeting of council for Tuesday, December the 3rd to order. Looking at the agenda, are there any changes, additions? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. The first item on the agenda is the public hearing for Intermunicipal Development Plan Bylaw 2019-25. And who will be introducing this? Ms. Wojtenko.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Just going to give a quick administrative review of the IDP, Intermunicipal Development Plan, between the Town of Canmore and the MD of Bighorn, before getting into the public presentations to get feedback on the draft IDP. And this is Bylaw 2019-25, which Council has already given first reading to. The MD of Bighorn has also given first reading to the same IDP, and they will be holding their public hearing on January 14th. So anyone who is present at this public hearing is also welcome to attend the public hearing of the MD of Bighorn as well, out in Exshaw. So what is an IDP? It is a statutory plan, and it is between two municipalities. And an IDP is poised to address land use planning issues and lands specifically at municipal borders. And it considers things like land use, transportation, utilities, environment, and a host of other things that a municipality or both municipalities deem to be relevant. Intermunicipal development plans fit into kind of our hierarchy of planning documents, and it's kind of at the top, and it's between two municipalities, and it provides directions to the municipality's other statutory plans, such as our MDP and any area structure plans. An IDP is adopted by 3 readings of a bylaw by council, as well as this statutory public hearing, which we're holding today. And with an IDP, it's required that both municipalities adopt the same plan. So if the Town of Canmore Council motions that there should be changes to the plan, the MD of Bighorn must be mutually agreeable to those changes and make those changes as well. So it will take some negotiation between the two municipalities if changes are proposed based off of any of the feedback that we hear from the public. This IDP was prepared based on a terms of reference that was approved between the Town of Canmore and Bighorn. So both councils agreed to how the plan would be prepared and what the plan would contain. The process was also guided by the Intermunicipal Committee, which is a combination of senior administration and councillors from both municipalities. So they have reviewed this draft plan at least 2 times before getting to this stage. We also presented a draft IDP at an open house, which was held in August of 2019, and that was out in Deadman's Flats. So where does this IDP apply? When we're looking at the boundaries between the Town of Canmore and the MD of Bighorn, the majority of those lands are provincially protected lands, and so therefore they're not developable and they're not under the jurisdiction of the municipalities, of ourselves. So we looked at the IDP. It's focusing on the area near Deadman's Flats. It's kind of a small area where both our municipalities have jurisdiction over development. Sorry if this is a little bit fuzzy, but this is the overview map. It gives a good insight into how much land we share borders with the MD of Bighorn, but how much of that land, which is all in green, is Crown land or provincially protected land, such as parks and wildland parks. In the IDP, we considered both IDP plan areas and notification areas. And each area has slight different policies, primarily on when we notify the other municipality of when development is being proposed. So different applications such as area structure plans, land use bylaw amendments and subdivisions, and development permits. One of the primary focuses of this plan is in dispute resolution, and it provides clear policies on both application referrals, when we do need to refer different types of applications, but also on how we deal with comments back from another municipality if there are any concerns or opposition. So first off, in that dispute resolution process, we'd go to administrative discussions. If they're unresolved there, then we go to intermunicipal committee discussions. If that's unresolved, we go to mediation. And then if that's not resolved through mediation, we would go to the municipal government board. So currently, in the planning process with an IDP, we would immediately go to the municipal government board for resolution. This process tries to resolve it before having to go to the municipal government board. So what are the next steps in the IDP process? Following both public hearings of the Town of Canmore and the MD of Bighorn, there could be amendments proposed by either council. As I mentioned earlier, these must be mutually agreeable by both parties. And then we'd bring a final document for second and third reading with both councils to be adopted by bylaw. And that's the end of my presentation. I do have a copy of the IDP present if there are any questions.
I don't think I have any questions. You remind me when we've scheduled second and third reading?
We have not scheduled
haven't
second and
scheduled.
third reading yet. We are waiting for the MD of Bighorn to have their open house, or sorry, their public hearing on January 14th, and then to see when we can schedule second and third. If any amendments are proposed by either municipality, we will need to sit down and have those discussions. So it would probably be sometime in February or March that we come back for second reading.
Okay, thanks. Are there any questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation. I open up the mic now to members of the public that would like to speak. Don't see a lot of public out there, Mr. Kaiser.
Mayor and Council, good morning. The IDP is not exactly an earth-shaking document. As I read it, the MD can pretty well continue what it's doing and town can continue its planning processes. But there is one piece of information that I'd like to request the town to add to the IDP. And I'm assuming because it's totally within the town and just on one of the maps on figure 2, that the MD would have no objection to it, but I realize the MD would need to agree as well. So the line is this blue line. And currently that line represents the town's growth boundary in the MDP. And that line has not been drawn arbitrarily. It was probably first drawn by the NRCB in 1992. It was confirmed by BC Ag in 1998 and therefore by the town's MDP in 1998. In 2015, again, not based exactly on that line, but based on the conservation wildland zoning to the right, to the east of that line, town actually did go to the municipal government board because of concerns of what the MD was planning east of Dead Man's Flats. So the town has recognized this growth boundary and the conservation wildlife for a number of years. Both the growth boundary and the planning area are under review according to the current, it's 2016 MDP, whatever the current MDP is, 2016 MDP. But at the moment, that line does represent the town's growth boundary. So I think just for information, both for council, for the public, and for the MD, that's a worthwhile line to have in there. I've shown the zoning, the direct control, the DC for Three Sisters lands, the CW for conservation wildland. You know, that would probably be too much detail for an intermunicipal development plan. But I think it is worthwhile to show the town's growth boundary as the current limit of town expansion. Basically means that anything outside of the growth boundaries, such as Thunderstone or the Canadian Gun Club, BFK Resort, should not expand or needs to be reclaimed. So it's an important and powerful statement.
Thank you.
I'd
So
be happy to
you're
respond
only
to
suggesting that that this figure 2 reflect the urban growth boundary, not all of the zoning. You're not suggesting that this figure 2, the IDP area, should show all of the zoning in the area, just the,
No, I think that'd be too much detail for this level of plan.
right?
I think just showing and I haven't shown the whole urban growth boundary. Of course, it continues along here.
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
quite, it took me half an hour to put that line in my little never mind, won't go into the detail. I'm not that good with graphics. So,
Okay. Thanks for your presentation. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak at this time? I'll give everybody one more opportunity if anybody wants to speak to the IDP. And if not, we'll look to the municipal clerk to read into the record any public written submissions.
Thank you. Mr. De Keyser submitted a copy of his map for the public record, and we also received a letter in favor from Quantum Place Development.
Thank you. Are there any final administrative comments, Ms. Wojtenko? See none. In which case, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Thanks for being here. And moving on with the agenda, looking to the minutes of the October 22nd, 2019 annual organizational meeting of council, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking to the minutes of the November 5th regular meeting of council, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G1, Ms. Dalrymple, Tax Penalty Bylaw 2019-26.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm here before you to request first, second, and third reading of Tax Penalty Bylaw 2019-26. Before we get started, I thought it might be worth clarifying a couple of points when it comes to property taxes and property tax penalties. The first is that penalties on unpaid taxes are imposed to encourage timely payments of amounts owing. They're not an interest charge intended to generate revenue. Also, as a refresher, the tax year is the calendar year, from January 1st to December 31st, and taxes are due halfway through the year on the last business day of June. When taxes remain unpaid after the June due date, they are subject to the current year penalty rates until paid or until they go into arrears. Arrears penalty rates are imposed based on the outstanding balance from previous year's taxes. These are the arrears penalties. So for example, if my 2019 taxes are unpaid after December 31st, 2019, starting in January 2020, they will then become arrears and they'll be subject to the arrears penalty structure. The tax penalty bylaw in place today was approved in 2016. This penalty structure imposes a total penalty amount of 36%. As you can see in this slide, if property taxes remain unpaid on the June 30th due date, the outstanding balance is then subject to the current year penalty structure. So that's a total of 18%, of which was applied 3 times in the year, in July, August, and September, in 3 different increments, in 5%, 6%, and 7%. If these taxes remain unpaid into the following year, they will go into arrears on January 1st and are subject to the following arrears penalties. The arrears penalties are applied on 4 different dates in January, April, July, and October, each time at a rate of 4.5%. So you can see that this results in penalty rates of 18% on current year taxes and 18% on arrears for our total of 36%. When looking to improve this current bylaw, 2 primary themes emerge. The first is to address the administrative challenges resulting from the tight timelines of this penalty structure. In particular, the back-to-back current year penalties applied in July and in August make it difficult for administration to reconcile the payments received in June before we then apply the July penalties and subsequent past due notices are mailed. The past due notices typically mailed in mid to late July, which makes it not uncommon for taxpayers to receive the notice after the August penalty has been applied. This results in accounts with a small penalty balance requiring further past due notices and results in taxpayer frustration. So an example of this scenario would be if a taxpayer missed the June due date, a penalty would be applied immediately in July. The taxpayer would then receive a past due notice issued mid to late July showing the total balance owing. So that would show their original levy plus that July penalty. And upon receiving the past due notice, which might get to them end of July or beginning of August, the taxpayer then hopefully promptly makes payment, maybe online or by mailing us a check, not realizing that an additional penalty has now been applied at the beginning of August. Therefore, their original payment to us is applied to the account. However, there's now an outstanding balance, that 6% August penalty. From there, the town must then issue another past due notice for the outstanding balance, and we commonly receive the feedback from the taxpayer expressing confusion and frustration, because from their perspective, they paid as soon as they received that past due notice, and they paid the full amount listed on the past due notice. The second item identified when reviewing our current bylaw is that the total penalty percentage of 36%, 18 applied to current year taxes and 18 applied to arrears, has the town of Canmore ranked as one of the higher penalty structures of our neighboring municipalities in the province. The proposed tax penalty bylaw 2019-26 seeks to improve this structure by changing the dates when penalties are imposed, as well as the penalty amounts, resulting in a more efficient and effective administrative workflow, and one that finds the town of Canmore penalty rates more in line with our neighbors and competitors, while still encouraging timely payment. The recommended revisions included in the proposed bylaw are as follows. The first is that we propose changing the second penalty after the due date to be September instead of August, and then adding that final current year penalty in October, as seen in the slide. This will allow administration the opportunity to accurately reconcile the accounts, apply those July penalties, and issue the past due notices. And it will also allow taxpayers the opportunity to make accurate payment in response to the past due notices with sufficient time before the next penalties are applied. The second proposed revision is to reduce the total penalty percentage from 36% to 30%. So that would be 15% on arrears, 15% on current and 15% on arrears. This reduction of the penalty percentage to 30% will be one that finds the town of Canmore more in line with our neighbors and competitors, while still anticipated to meet projected penalty amounts identified in the upcoming budget. In addition to tackling these priorities, since opening up the bylaw, we have also taken this opportunity to clean up the following challenges. The addition of a new clause to address administrative issues, such as delayed transmission of online payments, postmarked mail, administrative errors by town staff, and when the cost to process the penalty and past due notices outweighs the amount applied. Clarification that penalties will be calculated on the outstanding balance from an exact date rather than referring to the date the penalties are administratively applied to the account. Modification of the penalty amounts to a consistent 5% in all instances to simplify the structure for taxpayers and for the administrative calculations. And the removal of one penalty date from the arrears penalty structure in order to streamline our processes. When considering the financial impact of these changes, we've kept in mind that penalties are imposed to encourage prompt payment and not to generate revenue. While we do budget for revenue from tax penalties, we would estimate a negligible variance to the budget as a result of this recommendation. The amount of penalties collected in any given year are impacted by a number of variables, including the assessed values of properties with outstanding balances, as well as the number of tax rolls with outstanding balances, and therefore they're difficult to predict. For example, if you had a $1 million home with unpaid taxes, the penalties imposed would be greater than that of a property with a $300,000 value. You'll notice that an alternative option was also included in the request for decision. This alternative maintains the same penalty structure as the proposed, however with higher arrears penalty percentage at 6% each rather than 5% each, thus increasing the total penalty amount from the proposed 30% to 33%, still 3% less than our current bylaw. Administration is recommending the proposed structure to keep our total penalty percentages more closely aligned with our neighbors and competitors. And that wraps up my presentation, so at this time I would like to invite any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing this forward. I think it presents a good opportunity to fine-tune the tax penalty bylaw. So I'm curious a little bit about the TIPP program itself. And I don't know if you have any idea of, I would think the majority of taxpayers would be on TIPP, but I'm thinking I may be wrong.
We have about 5,200 accounts on TIPP out of our 12,000 tax rolls. So it's just
So a little bit less than half.
Yeah.
And what do you suppose it is that, I mean, in my world, TIPP program is great. I don't have to worry about this, and it's simple. So what is it, do you think, that a lot of taxpayers don't, why is it that we only have, call it 40% of the taxpayers on TIPP program?
Mm-hmm. Some of the feedback we have had in the past is some people are still uncomfortable with automatic debits from their account, sharing their banking details, or having less control over when that money comes out. They forget that they have this payment scheduled for the 15th, so when they're checking their balance in their account, I can write that check, and they write a check for something else, and then their TIPP defaults, or bounces, that kind of thing. So we get that feedback. We still have a fair number of seniors who are still not comfortable with online banking or not familiar with it and prefer to write checks. We have businesses who that's just part of their accounting process, that they prefer to do it in one lump sum payment, those sorts of things. So those are some of the more common comments that we hear. There's one more that we hear is our debit date is the 15th of every month, and for some people that cash flow doesn't work. They might get paid at the end of the month or something like that, so the 15th just doesn't work with their sort of cash flow.
Mm-hmm. And the other question I have about TIPP is in the bylaw itself, it specifies that if the taxpayer account is with a mortgage broker, then the TIPP program can't be applied. So why is that?
That's because the mortgage company would pay in full. We send them a statement once we have the tax levies issued. So we send them a statement of all the accounts owing. So CIBC, for example, would get a list of 50 accounts, and then they make a lump sum payment for those accounts. So if we had the property owner also on TIPP, it would skew the balances owed, and we would end up with credits and missed payments and things like that. So usually when somebody has their mortgage company paying their taxes, they are making their installment payments to the mortgage company, and so to pay us would basically be duplicating their payments.
I see. Okay. And on another sort of line of curiosity, do you have any idea what the average number of taxpayers are that miss their due date?
Yeah, so this year in July, we had roughly just shy of 800 accounts where the current year July penalty was imposed.
800, that's out of 12,000, you said?
Yeah, 12,000, well, we have about 11,000 that are taxable accounts, yeah. So, and then it dropped down in August. Those number of outstanding accounts almost dropped it in half, down to about 385 for the August penalty.
So when people get the first notice, many of them bring things into the good?
Yeah.
And then of those taxpayers that miss their deadline, do you have any idea how many end up actually going into arrears, don't pay it out that year? And
Yes, so this year we currently have 240, we currently today have 240 accounts with outstanding balances, accounts that are not on TIPP, and of the 240, 70 of those are currently in arrears. So they have taxes owing from 2018 or earlier.
okay, thank you. Good for you to have all that at your fingertips. I didn't give you any heads up, I'll be asking those questions. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Dalrymple. I can see how having a payment in August after missing the deadline in July would be very cumbersome for both your office and for the people that are trying to make that payment. So changing that second date to September 1st is probably quite a good administrative thing for everybody because I understand that better. I'm just wondering about the July 3rd date that you have for the current taxes outstanding. I was just confused about why that wouldn't be the same first of the month as everything else. So July 3rd is what you're using for the current taxes outstanding for the applying the 5%?
Well, we would use, so we're being very specific in that the current year July penalty would be applied as of what the account balance is at 11:59 p.m. on the first day of July. All the others would be the last day of the previous month. We just find we struggle a lot in July with the combination of the due date is the last business day of June, sorry. So years like 2019, that ended up being the 28th of June. So there's some confusion there. People think it's June 30th, so they make a payment for the 30th. We also have problems with the online banking. So if you paid at 10:05 p.m. Here in Canmore on June 28th, on that last business day of June, the banks tend to date stamp it with Eastern time, so they would consider that to be the next payment date or the next day. So we've just found that there's just a bit too much discrepancy there, especially with those online payments. Historically, we've had people, they have to give us a screenshot to show us that it was actually 10:05 p.m. on the 28th and that kind of thing, and we do a back and forth, and then it ends up getting reversed. So we just thought this would just allow us that breathing room to make sure that they're all done correctly and clear out that drop slot after the weekend, things like that.
Okay, and so if June 30th falls on a weekend, then the payment due date is actually the last business day before
Correct.
That weekend?
That's
Okay.
correct.
And then the July 3rd date allows you to reconcile all those things that happened, because July 1st is a holiday, right? So
Correct.
So July 3rd gives you the chance to reconcile everything?
Yeah, so we have it, so it's as of the 11:59 on the first business day of July. So first business day is almost always July 2nd, so yeah. So,
Oh, okay.
but we've also worded it that way specifically to indicate that the penalty is calculated as of that date, whether we apply it, administratively apply it on July 3rd or we apply it on July 7th, it is still calculated as of the account balance that day. So if I'm calculating it on July 5th, this system actually backdates it right to that time. So as opposed to if somebody walks in on July 3rd and I'm still at my computer doing the calculations, they feel that because it hasn't shown up on their account, it's not owing yet. And we wanted to clarify that it is actually calculated as of 11:59 of the previous day.
Okay, great. That's the one day that's complicated for you.
Yeah, that one gets messy.
Yeah.
The other ones are a lot more straightforward and
Okay.
far less accounts as well to reconcile at that time.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there other questions this time from members of council? Pardon me? Okay. Seeing none, thanks very much for the presentation, and thanks for the work you've put into this. So then I will move the council give first reading to the tax penalty bylaw 2019-26. And I'll speak in support. I really like the changes that you've proposed, particularly around the reduction of the overall penalty. I think that's quite fair and reasonable, and setting ourselves sort of in the middle of the pack is quite reasonable. And some of the other changes that you've suggested, and having sat on council for a number of years and hearing from taxpayers from time to time about why they missed their tax payment or concerns about their arrears, it really is. I think this change addresses quite a bit of what we do here from time to time. So I'll be happy to support this bylaw. Any other discussion on the bylaw? Councillor McCallum?
I just wanted to thank administration for bringing these changes forward. The only way we're going to get any better as an organization is if we continue to change our processes, and this is an example of that. So thank you.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move the council give second reading to the tax penalty bylaw 2019-26. Discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council go to third reading of the tax penalty bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? And I'll move the council give third reading of the tax penalty bylaw 2019-26. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G2, the tax installment payment plan bylaw amendment 2019-27.
Okay, good morning once again, Mayor and Council. I'm here before you to request first, second, and third reading of the Tax Installment Payment Plan, or TIPP Bylaw Amendment 2019-27. The Municipal Government Act, or MGA, authorizes municipalities to, by bylaw, permit taxes to be paid by installments at the request of the taxpayer. The current TIPP bylaw, 29-2005, requires updates to reflect current administrative practices, improve readability, and updates the outdated terminology. There are no changes to the nature of the program or to the debit dates in this revision. All changes are more administrative in nature. The highlights of these changes include clarification of the eligibility requirements. So for your reference, in the original bylaw or our current bylaw, this would be in section 3. And while we have maintained the requirement for tax and utility accounts to be current and have maintained the ineligibility if property taxes are paid by a mortgage company, we have added a few points of clarity to the requirements, included a completed application must be received along with valid banking information. The tax account must not have been previously removed by administration from the TIPP program in the current year. And taxes must have been levied on the tax account, or a current year assessed value must be known in order for town staff to have the basis for the calculation of the monthly debit amount. Although these eligibility requirements are not new to our common practice, we did feel it important to firm them up in the bylaw. Another change is that the payment schedule, calculations, and reference to notifications regarding payment default outlined in our current bylaw have now been removed. These terms and conditions are included on the TIPP application form signed by the applicant and in our internal procedural documents to ensure that they are consistently applied. However, these are operational procedures that don't need to be defined by a bylaw. Along with these revisions, we have also made some additions to the revised bylaw. A clause addressing supplementary levies has been added in the revised bylaw in Section 4 to clarify that TIPP will not automatically rebalance to debit the supplementary levy. As a refresher, supplementary levies are issued to properties that have reached completion between January 1st to September 1st. In early October, the additional value of these properties is assessed and taxes are imposed, prorated to the month in which occupancy was granted. From an administrative perspective, our financial software does not automatically rebalance the monthly debit amount to incorporate that supplementary levy. Additionally, we do not have the authority to increase a debit amount without advance notice and consent from the taxpayer. So as a result, the taxpayer may make a specific request to combine the supplementary levy with the existing TIPP payment for the property. In order to address a couple of our most common questions, we have also added in the removal from TIPP section, in Section 5 of our proposed bylaw, clarification that the plan automatically renews each calendar year unless canceled by written notification, and that TIPP is not transferable. So a new TIPP application must be completed for each property owned. And based on these revisions, I am requesting first, second, and third reading to the Tax Installment Payment Plan, or TIPP Bylaw Amendment 2019-27. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks very much. I have one line of questioning. So in your report on the second page under bullet 6, it's talking about when unpaid utilities are transferred to the tax account, etc. And in the 6A in your report, it says, as such, the revised bylaw states in 5.2B that the town may remove a taxpayer from TIPP when unpaid utilities are transferred, but in the bylaw, it's shall, not may. So the intent is to have it shall?
Yes,
Right.
that must have been
As the bylaw reads.
Yep, we shall, because we want to ensure that all both the tax account and the utility account are up to date in order to qualify for the program.
So when the town removes the taxpayer from TIPP for either of those reasons, how is the taxpayer then notified?
Our practice is to notify them in writing. So we either send a letter if we don't have an email address, or nowadays we do send an email address, send to the email address to notify them that they have been removed, and then we notify them of the balance outstanding and then the upcoming penalty dates and how they can make their payment.
Great. And that's the current practice, and that's directed by the existing bylaw in Section 6 that notice of removal pursuant to Section 5 shall be sent to the taxpayer by ordinary mail to the taxpayer's last known address as indicated on the tax roll. And is there intent or is there reason that that direction is not in the new bylaw?
We just decided to remove that, considering that it was more of an operational procedure, and that it has changed, that now it's email, and when we have email, now it's in writing. We might do a phone call first, we might then follow up in writing, that kind of thing. We just found that it was just more of a procedural process for us to document rather than make it a law of how it needs to happen.
I can understand that. So if there was a slip up and somebody was removed from TIPP and didn't know it, and then that came to light in the future, then what would administration's response be?
I think that would, in a case like that, we would first of all, we would review how that happened. If that was an administrative error, then we would reinstate them if that was their preference. And then any penalties that might have been imposed at that time would have been imposed due to town error, which in the new penalty bylaw recently approved, we can then waive those penalties if it was due to a staff error.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you for the presentation. In the administrative report, you talk about updating terminology to include references to financial institutions rather than banks. But then down in eligibility 3.2B, it still says applications include valid banking information. Do we want to leave it like that, or should it say technically financial institution information, which is more of a mouthful, which is,
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that.
I'm not too sure what the appropriate reference would be. Valid banking information? Valid.
Well, and
Can you come forward?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, it was just from my own, I guess, terminology that has been commonly used. I still refer to it as banking information rather than financial institution, but to your point, we can look up whether there's actually a terminology difference between the two and ensure we're using the accurate terminology.
I have no idea, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, we'll look into it for sure.
Is it germane to you?
No, I'm just making sure that we don't have to come back later for amendments if it's not quite accurate is all.
Okay, great. Are there other questions at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation again. At this time, I will move that council give first reading to the tax installment payment plan bylaw 2019-27. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading to the tax installment payment plan bylaw. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council go to the third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading to the tax installment payment plan bylaw 2019-27. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And thank you for your work on both those bylaws. Moving on to item H1, appointment of BIA board members. Ms. McClett.
Good morning, Your Worship, members of council. I'm here to request a motion from council to appoint the Downtown Business Improvement Area Board as presented. At the October 30th meeting, AGM, 3 new members were appointed to the BIA board, and those were Charlie McLean from Cafe of Books, Stephen Pearson from Freestyle Fape Canmore, and Jeremy Arsenault from Snowy Owl Tours. The rest of the board is previously sitting, and Councillor Mera is the council representation, and I am the administrative representation on the BIA board.
Thanks for that. It's been a number of years since I sat on this board. Remind me how new board members come forward. Is it sort of nomination from the floor, or what's the process?
Yeah, so there's a request that goes out to membership to say that there are whatever the number of positions are that are open that year, requesting people to either submit their names for that program, and then at the AGM, the floor is opened for nominations as well. Generally, they come in advance of the meeting, but it can be either or.
Great. And just out of curiosity, because I'm not familiar with, must be a new business, Freestyle Vapes, Canmore? That's
Correct.
Downtown business?
Correct.
Where is it located?
That's a great question that I do not have an answer to. In that strip, it's in a strip, one of those strip malls.
areas.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, straightforward. Are there any questions for Ms. McLeod? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation. With that, I'll move to council appoint members to the Downtown Business Improvement Area Board as presented. Discussion on that motion. I'll support the motion, of course, and just take a moment to thank all of the board members for the work they do in a volunteer position to help keep the downtown vibrant. We're all busy, and particularly these folks here who run businesses are also quite busy, and without people in the community stepping up and volunteering for these positions, we wouldn't have as vibrant a community. So just take this opportunity to thank these board members for their time. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'm going to move on to item H2, the 2020 budget amendments. Just like being in the court in a sidebar conversation. Approach the bench. Okay, so item H2, the 2020 budget amendments. Ms. Richardson.
Good morning, Mayor Borman and members of council. I'm here this morning to discuss proposed budget amendments to the 2020 approved budget. As such, our recommendations are that Council direct administration to cancel capital projects 7056, 7057, and 7023, that Council approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for an additional $20,000 for the Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission requisition, that Council approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for an additional $50,000 for additional regional service hours through BVRTC, and that Council approve the 2020 operating budget amendments as presented, and then that Council approve the 2020 capital budget amendments as presented. Numbers 1, 4, and 5 are recommendations as put forward by the Finance Committee at the meeting on November 7th for consideration by Council. Numbers 2 and 3 were also included within the operating budget amendments recommended at that time, but have now been broken out as separate motions. As a review of the overall process, in 2018, Council approved a 2-year operating and capital budget covering 2019 and 2020, so we already have an approved budget for 2020. For the amendment process, the budget or plans were not opened up for a comprehensive review. The amendments are really meant to be the exception for demands that meet the criteria of extraordinary, unexpected, or emergent. When looking at the proposed amendments, the strategic framework was also utilized with regards to Council's strategic priorities. As outlined in the budget and business plan guidelines, with multi-year budgets, the focus is on departments operating within their approved multi-year budget rather than focusing on each year in isolation. So if 2019 results in a departmental surplus, the department will have the ability to carry over its surplus to assist its operations in 2020 with a compelling argument and CAO approval that is intended to exclude any one-time unbudgeted revenue. Conversely, if there's a shortfall, a department is expected to overcome that deficit in 2020. That said, we're not anticipating any shortfalls in any departments as a whole. The proposed operating and capital amendments were then presented to the Finance Committee on November 7th, where the committee voted to have these amendments brought to Council for approval. Historically, we have grouped operating amendments and capital amendments in how we present the amendments when we bring them forward. This year, as we reviewed the amendments, 3 themes emerged, so we have also grouped the 2020 amendments into those 3 buckets. So ones that have arisen as a result of Council direction and priorities, ones that relate to uncontrolled third-party costs, and ones that are internal items that we're bringing forward. I'll begin with an outline of the operating and capital overall, and then we can get into the specifics around individual amendments based on those 3 buckets, and finally summarize the overall impact of those changes. So for the operating impacts, as a reminder, we were already starting with an approved tax increase net of growth of 4.6%. There wasn't a lot of room for additional items, so we really focused on how these proposed amendments met the definition of extraordinary, emergent, and unexpected. Another rule of thumb that we sometimes reference is what a 1% tax increase represents, and so as a reminder, that's about $245,000. There are 11 proposed changes with a net impact of $69,000, which brings the total tax increase net of growth up 0.2% to 4.8% net of growth. Additionally, there are 4 operating amendments with no tax impact. On the capital side, there are 15 recommended capital amendments totaling $1.684 million in 2020, with a corresponding reduction of $282,000 in 2021. We'll start with the amendments pertaining to council direction and priorities. Transportation is one of the strategic priorities identified by council, and there are 4 amendments related to this, 2 operating and 2 capital. On the operating side, these are both the ones that have separate motions that arise from the Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission. The first is to increase the requisition for an additional $20,000. The second relates to additional regional service hours for $50,000. On the capital side, there's a
Sorry, do you mind if I interrupt?
Of course.
Could you just give a bit more detail on those 2 changes?
So Mr. Bean came to the Finance Committee meeting and gave specific presentations on each of these items. So the requisition relates to their overall costs and our proportion of those costs. I believe there were operating and capital items included in his presentation, and so this represents the overall increase in our portion of it based on the service level that they're providing. On the regional side, we discovered that there were some issues with the on-time service in the summer, and so these additional service hours, my understanding from his presentation, is to help address some of those issues, to add additional service routes in the regional service. So there's more frequent service, I believe, throughout the day. So this additional $50,000 is, again, our portion of the regional service and that increase in the service hours they're providing.
Great, thank you.
Does that address?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. On the capital side, so the elevation intercept parking preliminary design, so that's an additional $100,000 that we're proposing to fund through cash in lieu of parking. There's also an additional $35,000 for intercept parking site evaluation, and then again funded through cash in lieu of parking. Just as a reminder, the cash in lieu of parking reserve is used to fund the purchase of land suitable for future parking developments and to plan, develop, and construct parking facilities.
I'm pretty sure somebody asked the question at the Finance Committee. Just curious what the current balance is in that reserve.
Thank you.
500,000? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Irwin. Another strategic priority is around environmental sustainability. So we have 1 operating item, which then provides information to the second item, the capital item, which has 2 components, the renewable energy feasibility study and plan, and the electric vehicle fleet feasibility study. Well, I'm really stumbling over my words today. So on the operating side, and it's an additional $12,000 to provide increased tracking expense on our fleet that will filter into that information, will go into that electric vehicle feasibility study. So the renewable energy feasibility study and plan is $50,000. The electric vehicle fleet feasibility study is $10,000, 50% to be funded through the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. So that 50% is the $5,000 that's the other in the funding.
On the first bullet under capital, that the funding 55 from general capital and 5,000 from other, the other is intended to be a grant or
Correct.
some such?
Through the Municipal Climate Change Action Center.
Right, thank you.
The next strategic priority relates to wildlife coexistence, and there we have a capital project for an additional $20,000 to be funded through general capital for coexistence near wildlife initiatives project. So this was an original budgeted project with a budget of $50,000. We're now proposing to bring the total budget up to $70,000. That project includes 4 separate items within it: the Quarry Lake Dog Park signage and boundary delineation, a social norms implementation, our fruit tree removal plan, and then the fruit tree incentive program on private property.
Councillor McCallum, did you have a question?
I actually had a question on the previous slide, and I was just trying to remind myself. So the renewable energy feasibility study and plan, is this study meant to encapsulate what it is that we're going to be required of us moving forward to ensure that we are capable for alternative energies? So, for instance, let's pretend in 15 years, an eighth of the community has an electric car. How are we going to prepare our communities and our neighborhoods to to be prepared to be able to actually charge those vehicles in their garages? Is that like one aspect of a larger plan?
I'll need to look back at the details on that. I do know there were, I believe, a 3-phase study and plan meant to, I believe, encompass some of those items. I think the next item, the vehicle fleet feasibility, was with regards to our own fleet.
Yes, that's clear. It was the first one, just renewable energy feasibility study and plan, making sure that we're planning our communities, our future neighborhoods and our existing neighborhoods for the upgrades required to be able to receive that kind of technology in the future. You're looking to your
details
squad.
from the last one, yes.
Ms. DeSoto?
So there is a justification sheet in your package.
Yep, I'm looking at it right now.
I'm just, there
page
is
is that?
some detail there.
Page 63, Your Worship, or Mayor Barman.
So the funding requested is for a consultant to conduct a feasibility study and plan with the following 3 phases: high-level screen, detailed study and target setting and implementation pathways. High-level screen of the low-carbon options will determine the most promising areas for further study. The scope will encompass the entire community, including commercial, residential, institutional, and municipal activities. Renewable low-carbon options to consider include, but are not limited to, solar, wind, biomass, and hydroelectric, micro-hydro, and inline hydro generation. So it's more about looking at alternative energy sources that would be feasible to implement in our community, and less about the electrical vehicles charging that I think you were referring to. So these would be potential district energy sources, looking at solar arrays, microenergy projects for facility buildings, those kinds of things.
Okay, it's kind of disappointing, but okay, thank you. Thanks, that's fine, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions on environmental sustainability?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I think I covered off all the wildlife coexistence. Any questions on that item or any of the projects within it? If not, I'll carry on to the other items.
Right.
One item that's arisen on the operating side is with regards to overnight parking on municipal lots, and there was council direction to support an initiative related to that. So we're proposing, the details of the project are still to be finalized, but we're adding $110,000 related to that initiative for those items outlined below. And on the capital side, where there's a proposal to add an adaptive swing project for $52,000 to be funded through the general capital reserve.
Can you just leave that slide up for a sec?
Of course.
Great, thank you. Yes. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. So the overnight parking on municipal lots initiative, this is going to come back later for council approval once the plan is refined. Do we expect that that $110,000 is now going to be permanent within our budget moving forward? Squad.
Ms. Cottle?
Honestly, we're unsure. I don't think that is the assumption, but until we do the work, we really don't know.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just wasn't sure how far you were in the plan. Thank you so much.
And within that, in the breakdown there, some of the items like signage and some of those costs I do believe may pertain to getting that program up and running, and then the extent to which that would remain, I think, is still to be determined by the details of the program itself.
Great.
One other item that directly relates to council direction and priorities but doesn't have a tax impact is a move of some sustainability expenses from planning to public works. We moved the individuals and the salary related to the positions in that area, but there were still some residual expenses there. We're really just trying to keep all those sustainability items within the same cost center. So this is mainly administrative. There's $36,000 that we're going to move. The next bucket I referred to was uncontrolled third-party costs. So there are 3 operating items. The first is an increase in the Canmore Rec Center custodial services, an increase of $55,000 that relates to a new contract for custodial services in the rec center. The next item is an increase in power expenses due to increased transmission and distribution charges for $107,000. And the final item is a reduction in the CCHC requisition and the PAH taxes that are collected for $25,000.
I think we could just talk a little bit about that at this point, given it's a public forum. So do you want to speak to that?
So we did receive a letter from their board saying that they had reduced operating costs of $25,000. I believe there were 2 alternatives looked at. One would propose putting that $25,000 into their reserve. There's a portion that goes to their operations, a proportion that goes into the reserve. The other option is that we can reduce the PAH taxes that are levied and collected from the community.
Right, and I think it's important to note that as CCHC's inventory grows and they become more self-sustaining, then they're beginning to reduce their requests from tax-funded sources. So, good news.
Correct, and that's exactly what we're seeing come
Right.
through here through this amendment from them.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum, you had a question?
Yes. So do we expect that that's going to be a permanent reduction in that requisition or that operating amount within their budget, or?
I'm trying to recall the exact wording in the letter we received from them. I don't recall if there was an indication. Also, some of the provincial budget impacts that we're experiencing, they might experience as well. Ms. DeSoto?
Ms. DeSoto?
So the current reduction of $25,000 is being funded by a surplus from the prior, from this year that they're
Right.
expecting. So they aren't budgeting for a surplus.
It just happened.
Correct, it
And
just
they're
happened.
offering their
So,
surplus
yeah,
back.
it's not known whether that will be sustainable, but as Mayor Borelman pointed out, as the portfolio grows in CCHC and that they're able to get sort of, what's the words I'm looking for?
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale and more efficient, that they will be able to reduce their overall requisition from the town. So that is the ultimate goal.
Okay, yes, of course. Thank you very much.
There isn't anything further on that slide. The next 2 items relate to our payroll costs. So the first is we're proposing an increase in our salaries, wages, and benefits slippage from $500,000 up to $700,000 based on the 6-year trend we're seeing. There's also an amendment to adjust the 2020 COLA from 2.5% down to 2%, and that's based on Calgary CPI as outlined in our budget guidelines. On the capital side, we have an amendment to increase the budget for the Rocktopia wall replacement, proposed to be funded through the Asset Rehab and Replacement Reserve for $15,000. The total budget for the project would now be $95,000. Originally, it was approved at $80,000, and that's to address an increased cost estimate, which we believe relates to supply cost increases and also the changes in the exchange rate. 2 additional items which don't have a tax impact. The first, I addressed our own municipal impact from the power expenses on our own facilities, but that also impacts our water utility. So there's an increased $53,000 there that will be offset with reserve transfer. There's also a transfer within engineering between their salary, wages, benefits, and professional services for $45,000. The final third bucket I discussed was related to internal items. The first operating item we have relates to legal services and the proposed amendment to add in-house legal counsel. The $170,000 relates to the costs of that individual, salary, wages, benefits, the costs of adding that in-house position. Correspondingly, there would be a reduction in the external legal expenses we're currently incurring as a result of bringing that service in-house. So we're proposing a reduction of $150,000 related to the legal expenses we currently pay externally.
Great, and trying to recall the conversation around this item at the Finance Committee. So if this were to proceed as proposed, then what's left in the budget for outside counsel?
There.
Mrs. DeSoto?
The $150,000 was our full budget that we budgeted for legal counsel. That being said, there's $20,000 or $30,000 in the executive office budget for professional fees.
In the which?
In my budget, in the CAO's budget for professional fees. And those can be allocated for professional services, including legal services. And those aren't specifically budgeted for certain line items. It's
right.
More of a placeholder, so that would be the budget we would propose to use for legal services and others.
Right. And again, we did discuss this for some time at the Finance Committee, but if we're successful in filling this position, you're confident that what exists in your budget then for additional legal counsel would be adequate?
I wouldn't say I'm confident in that. I think that we do believe there will be additional legal expenses. Legal expenses are one of those things that varies widely from year to year, depending on whether we have any litigation. And it's really the litigation that's the unknown. So there could be a scenario where we have litigation expenses. One example that comes to mind was when we had the MGB file that, in and of itself, that was about $100,000 of legal fees. So if that was to occur, we would come back to council to potentially request additional budget or be explaining a variance. Mm-hmm. But outside of litigation, we do believe our budget to be sufficient.
Mm-hmm. And could you describe the sort of parameters, the skill set that you would be looking for in a in-house legal?
We have not done the work to establish a job description, pending waiting for council approval of this item. We have done a budget analysis and a comparator analysis. And I've been requesting from managers details of how and when they use legal services. We know there are three main buckets. We have HR and related expenses. We have bylaw services and the related expenses, and then planning law and the related expenses. And so those would be the three areas of expertise or skill that we would be looking for somebody to have.
Would you expect, once there's some process started, that you'd be receiving applications from lawyers that have municipal planning experience? I mean, literally working either for a municipality or with a firm that does a lot of municipal work?
I would believe that this would be a position that would attract those kind, absolutely. We also believe that there's a lifestyle and a location choice that Canmore has an advantage of. At the Finance Committee, we had discussed whether this salary range was sufficient. This is at the top tier salary range in the organization, equivalent to the sort of GM portfolio. It's likely less than what a lawyer on a partner track in a large law firm would make in the city. So there would be a distinct decision to sort of leave that partner track, which comes with higher upside in pay scale, but quite a different workload and environment. So
we've certainly seen that in the past, where the town of Canmore has been an attractive employer for people from outside of town who may be prepared to take a reduced pay grade just for because they want to live in Canmore.
Well,
We've
but
seen
that being said, I do want to clarify that the salary range is comparable to communities that have in-house counsel and our comparator set. So it's not less than our comparator municipal set. It's just less than private sector law.
And in the unlikely event, well, I shouldn't say it, if it should play out that you're not feeling any of the applicants meet your grade, what would your response to that situation be?
Yeah, so we certainly look for aptitude and attitude and skill set, and there's lots of examples of when we've had to go back out to market and do 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. At the end of the day, if we find that this budget request does not provide the level of candidate we're looking for, we could report back to council around, we're still using external counsel, either ask for a budget increase or propose an alternative approach for providing legal services.
Great. I certainly, I know from sort of day-to-day business that there's often occasions come along where somebody will say, gee, can we run that past legal? And there's a hesitation to do that because of the cost of using contracted legal. So from that perspective, I really support this direction. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. If a question through the chair to Ms. DeSoto, should you find have a list of shortlisted candidates, would council be able to be apprised of that and have some say in that prior to, which is, I know, very unusual. It is unusual, period. I actually have real concerns about this, and I think I expressed that in finance, and it's not about the idea of in-house counsel, it's about the idea of expecting for that wage to get all of everything that we want for Christmas for that wage. And I honestly don't think it's actually possible without compromising in some way, shape, or form, and when it comes to our legal, it's not something I'm interested in compromising. I'm more concerned to hear that you haven't actually been able or haven't put together a job description yet, because that feels to me that this budget request isn't quite complete. And so I think that we'll be there someday. I just don't think we're there now, and I don't think that we're...
That's getting into the debate.
My apologies. So yes, back to my original question, would council be able to take a look at the shortlisted candidates prior to an offer being made?
Through the chair to Councillor McCallum, I actually don't believe that's the sandbox in which council typically plays. Certainly if council wishes to outline what their expectations are from a qualities and a candidate perspective, absolutely administration would welcome that and value that as input into developing the job description and in the interview process, etc. I do believe, for example, when we brought economic development in-house, it was a brand new position. This is a similar analogous situation. We did share the job description with council once it was drafted, and I'm happy to do that as information, and you could see if you see significant holes or gaps that you believe need to be filled. At the end of the day, we are being well served by our external counsel. Yep. This is what we feel to be the most efficient and effective way moving forward, given the amount we're spending on external counsel and sometimes the time that we need to spend to bring external counsel up to speed on our issues. We're paying for that. But we would, if a suitable candidate isn't found or the budget isn't sufficient, We would continue to use external counsel as we always have done, and be well served by that. So it's certainly up to council to discuss and debate that further.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. DeSoto.
Just before we move on from that issue, is there any other discussion that other councillors would like to have on the matter of bringing legal in-house? See none? Let's move on with the presentation. Thank you.
The next item we're bringing forward pertains to a capital amendment for a TIP 20 deep utility increase, an additional $1.2 million to be financed through debt. This relates to the change in the construction methodology related to that project due to the constraints at the site. The next capital item is an increase in the budget and scope for the climbing flooring replacement. There is a current budget of $40,000 approved that is intended to cover the covers only. So we're proposing an additional $22,000 also to be funded through the Asset Rehab and Replacement Reserve that will cover both the covers themselves and also the foam in the high traffic areas, which is breaking down. And there's some cost efficiencies to handling those both at the same time. Another capital item relates to the corporate digitization project. So we did have an unfunded project in there of $190,000, which would be canceled to be replaced with an amended scope of $35,000 to be funded from general capital, which is to have the planning and development land files digitized by an outside service provider. The next capital item is an increase in the budget for the PC lifecycle and new equipment, an additional $10,000 to be funded through the Asset Rehab and Replacement Reserve, and this is to address the increased demand for laptops and associated peripherals, just to ensure we have sufficient budget in that area. The next item pertains to a new rubber surface for the Three Sisters Playground. This was an approved 2021 capital project for $282,000, which we're proposing to cancel and replace with a 2020 project for $195,000. The project was originally scheduled to be completed in 2021. However, it's a combined project with the Parent Council Committee, and they've raised $140,000 and accessed some grant funding, so they're keen to move the project up by a year and be able to utilize that grant funding they've accessed. So it's bringing it up by a year, but our contribution to the project has decreased as a result of the work they've done.
I know there's not a capital sheet specifically for that project, or am I wrong? Would there be a capital sheet ultimately for that project sheet? I'm just thinking, when you see funding listed as other, it would be nice to see on the capital sheet / grant funding, so it's not just sort of plucked from the air or whatever comes along. I mean, I appreciate that money is currently has been raised by the parents group, and thank you to them. I'm just thinking for future reference, it's nice to see in a capital sheet precisely what the funding is. Just a suggestion.
For sure, we can address that. So pending approval today, we still need to create the capital numbers for the approved capital projects, and so at that time we can address that wording as well to ensure it's clear what those additional funding sources are, that it is that fundraising and grants that they've accessed.
Okay.
Any additional questions, comments around the playground? The next item pertains to the Legacy Trail project, which has been done with the town of Banff. So this is $60,000 from FGTF. So the town of Banff allowed for some of their FGTF funding to be used for the Legacy Trail extension to the Travel Alberta site in Canmore. And then in 2015, council approved an allocation of $60,000 in our funding for a capital project. It was $1316 at the time, which was to construct a multi-use pathway to extend into Banff. That Banff extension project was delayed, and we ended up closing that capital project without the transfer of that funds. Now they're nearing completion of the project, and this is just to formalize that approval for the transfer of the funds to the town of Banff to complete that project.
Mm-hmm. And just to remind those in the community that are not aware of that background, so when we built the Legacy Trail extension from Park Gates to the town of Banff co-funded that, and there was an agreement that we would co-fund an extension at the Banff end when the time came. So this is sort of a wash in that way. Yeah, thanks.
Two final items related to the water utility. The first is a placeholder for the EPCOR contract related to the water utility, $405,000 to be funded within water and wastewater utility operations through a reserve transfer. Also, an agreement review for our water utility services for $70,000 to assess the value of the water utility services and look at alternative service delivery options and whether they should be considered. So that summarizes all the individual budget amendments. Again, just to reiterate, this is where that leaves us overall for our operating budget amendments. So it takes us from the approved tax increase of 4.6% net of growth up to 4.8% net of growth as a result of that incremental $69,000. And as a reminder, there were also those 4 items that have no tax impact. And this is the summary of the capital items, again totaling $1.7 million, with the reduction in 2021 of $282,000 related to that the playground project.
And all of well, the projects that are noted there that are funded from cash, and well, that's cash in lieu of parking. So I had a question around the some of the projects that would be funded from off-site levies, and there's no concern with approving projects at this time that are funded from off-site levies?
So the off-site levy is not a funding source. We recover monies through the off-site levy. Any projects that are off-site leviable, that off-site eligible for the off-site levy, I'll put it that way, are funded through debt. And so we seek concurrence, I guess, from BODA and any of our MD partners who are stakeholders in the off-site levy. We may not disagree, but the extent to which any of those projects are attributable to growth or eligible for recovery through the off-site levy don't directly impact any of these capital projects and wouldn't necessarily impact them at this time. The only 2020 capital project that I think where we currently reference off-site levy as of the reserve as a funding source is the South Bow River Loop project, and we've been collecting on that project since 2005. So there's money there that we've flagged as off-site levy money, and that's money we've already collected since that project has been included for some time.
Great, thank you.
So again, just to reiterate the operating impact from these amendments, the net impact is $69,000, which results in that 0.2% increase in taxes net of growth. This is the results on our debt costs, our total debt level. So we're at 62% in 2021. That's the highest kind of recent year there. And there's 2 big projects that contribute to that increase, the fire hall and also the Pump House 2 treatment capacity upgrade.
And that's 62% of the provincially mandated limit?
Yes. Right. The red line is the provincially mandated limit, and the black is our own internally imposed debt limit at 70%.
Right.
These are our debt servicing costs. Less constraints there as the cost of debt is currently quite low. Some of the older projects that have higher interest rates continue to fall off the schedule.
So we continue to be, with these changes, continue to be in pretty reasonable shape in regards to being able to service the debt we have.
Correct. And this is the impact on our reserve balances. So final administrative item, if there aren't any questions on the debt and reserve balances. As noted in our policies, we do need formal council approval to cancel any projects that haven't been started in 2019 and are not intended to be started by the end of the year. The first is the Shared Information Governance Services, Project 7056, for $30,000. That was for a regional model, and our partners had some staffing changes, and so this project has not been moved forward. The second is the Temporary Public Art Project, 7057, for $15,000. Those staff resources were shifted from this project to the Organic Spin Art Project. And finally, the Stones Canyon Creek mitigation, number 7023, for $80,000. That mitigation ended up not being a requirement of the development, and at the time that project was initially forward, it had been identified that that mitigation work might not be required. So that was raised at the initial approval time. So in conclusion, our recommendations are that Council direct administration to cancel those 3 capital projects, that they approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for the additional $20,000 for the BVRTC requisition, the Council approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for the additional $50,000 for the regional service hours, the Council approve the 2020 operating budget amendments, and the Council approve the 2020 capital budget amendments as presented. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Are there questions at this time from members of council? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. Mayor Borman, so process for approval, if a member of council wants to tease a budget item out that they would like to debate further or change, how would you like that to proceed?
Just through an amending motion. So, for instance, if I had a motion on the table to approve the 2020 operating budget amendments as presented, and there was something specific to that a councillor wanted to have a sidebar or a separate conversation on, just amend that motion to exclude that component.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And then we would discuss the amendment.
Great. Thank you.
Are there questions at this time for administration? I know we spent quite a bit of time discussing all of this at the Finance Committee, so it's not new for council. I see no further questions, so thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
Great. And then I will at this time move the council direct administration to cancel Capital Project 7056, which is Shared Information Governance Services, Project 7057, which is the Temporary Public Art Project, and Project number 7023, which is Stones Canyon Creek Project. Discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for an additional $20,000 for the Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission requisition. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move the council approve the 2020 operating budget amendment for an additional $50,000 for additional regional service hours through the Bow Valley Regional Transit Services Commission. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council approve the 2020 operating budget amendments as presented. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I don't have any amendment sheets, but I don't think I'll need it. You've been robbed.
We'll give you a moment while you write that.
Okay. I would basically like to remove the introduction of the in-house legal and have that budget remain in contracted services, which is where I believe it belongs, correct?
Currently? Yeah.
Yeah.
Through the chair to Councillor McCallum, I believe there's sort of two approaches. The one Mayor Borman was suggesting was that you amend the current motion to exclude the budget amendments related to in-house legal counsel. So then council could vote on that amendment to exclude that.
Correct.
Or you could specifically, as I think you were going, amend the motion to reflect that fees for legal counsel remain in contracted services. And
Well, if the motion was to exclude that and the debate occurred and that was a successful amendment, then
then you
by
would,
default, it would remain as is.
That's what I'm worried about.
no, then you could then put the motion on the floor regarding in-house legal counsel separately and debate that.
I have 4 pens and none of them work. So,
Is that disappearing ink?
well, it's pencil. I feel like I'm 12 again.
Yeah.
Like literally, they're all garbage.
So literally, the motion is to simply remove the in-house legal position from the budget.
And put the money in, and to spend that money in from in-house
So if this
contracted
amendment
services.
to remove in-house legal from the budget
It would be
was
status quo.
successful, it would be status quo. Wouldn't require a secondary motion.
Is that what you understand from that motion? Okay, did I get it right for once?
For once?
All the winning.
Okay, so the amendment's on the floor. Do you want to
Yes.
speak to that?
So I spoke to it at Finance Committee. I'll speak to it again. I don't disagree with the need for this position. I understand the arguments behind this position. I believe legal is very, very important to our organization. I am sad that we stop to think whether we want to consult legal, because I think if for a moment we go, maybe I should call a lawyer, you probably should. However, I don't think that for the money that we have set aside, that we are going to get the caliber of lawyer that we are looking for, and to rely on the stars aligning so that somebody that's looking for a lifestyle change and has all of the experience that we're looking for, which is a pretty big mix of experience, is going to want to come here for half of what they'd be paid in the private sector. I don't see that as feasible or realistic. And that's my argument. I respect administration. I respect the pushback about asking about seeing the shortlisted candidates. It's actually the answer I would have expected. But without even a job description, I can't move forward and approve this change. And that's my argument.
Okay, speaking to your amendment, I have a different point of view. I recognize $170,000 may seem like not a lot of compensation in the legal world, but it's also not chump change. And I mean, it's the same range as all of our senior level administration. And in the past, we have regularly hired great qualified candidates for the senior level positions in that salary range. I believe, when we talked about this at the Finance Committee, that there's a good opportunity, good likelihood that there might be a lawyer out there who's well experienced and just wants to get out of the rat race, get out of the city, or simply just would love to live in Canmore, and with that salary range could make it work. You referenced the number of times in our day-to-day business where somebody says, oh, well, maybe we should consult with legal on this. And as often as not, that consultation doesn't occur because it's really expensive. I feel that it would be of real benefit to council and the town of Canmore to have in-house legal that, to your point, is informed and experienced in planning law and HR law and the bylaw services that Ms. DeSoto referenced. and more to the point, I'm quite confident in the CAO to not simply hire somebody who doesn't seem to be the right candidate or meet the expectations because there's a budget to do that. I'm confident that if the right applicant didn't come along, the CAO would put it out for a re-tender or whatever that's called, and wait until the right person came along, or ultimately come to council and say, we've learned we can't get the right kind of person in-house for that compensation package, and then have a choice of recommending or asking council to increase that package or basically continue with the status quo. So I won't support your amending motion for those reasons. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I think we had quite a good discussion about this at Finance Committee, and so it's good that we have this today as well. I think having an in-house legal counsel would actually help us a lot with our day-to-day issues, and the bylaw services, I think, could use this level of support, because I think we could probably get more action on our bylaws as they move through a legal system. If we have to move our bylaw enforcement through legal, I think those support services would be there. I think there are a lot of procedures that we do in the town of Canmore that are quite repetitive and replicatable. So an in-house legal would be able to identify those things that we do routinely and support those processes without us having to go outside to contracted services all the time. So I think the in-house legal counsel would be something that's suitable for our organization because of the variety of things that we do, but some of those things are repeated. And so I think having legal look at those things through those eyes would make some of those procedures a little more streamlined and less onerous on the staff that's currently looking after some of those things. So I think I will not support the amending motion for many of the reasons, as well as what Mayor Borman had outlined with previous conversations.
Anybody else speaking to the amending motion? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would remind everyone that most lawyers don't work without a legal assistant, and that's a $70,000 touch right there. And there is no plan right now to have a legal assistant with this lawyer. So legal assistants do a lot of the grunt work that lawyers don't do, so that they can focus on other matters. And I fear that this is going to be in a position, as it sits right now, and based on the size of community we are now, that there will be a request. Should the stars align and we find this magic candidate, that we'll be looking at having to hire a legal assistant within 12 months of that hire. So, and that's fine as long as everybody's clear that that's what's going to happen. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? In favor?
Of the amendment?
Yeah. Opposed? The amendment's defeated. So back to the main motion then, that council approved the 2020 operating budget amendments as presented. Discussion on that motion. I'll support the motion. We do a lot of work to get to this point, even though it's a 2-year budget, and we spent a lot of time last year developing the 2019-2020 budget. I'm finding that using a 2-year budget approach is showing real success, because the second year it's far less onerous for administration particularly, but also council. And then to have the 2-year budget come back for some tweaking, some amendments at this point, I think it's working quite well as a process. We did have very comprehensive discussion about the various changes at the Finance Committee, which is where this is first discussed, and the Finance Committee approved the budget to come back to council for approval with the amendments recommended. So not only will I support the motion, but I'm further indicating my support for this process for the 2-year budget cycle. So, yeah, good to see. Is there other discussion on the main motion? Councillor McCallum?
Budget is the top two important parts of our job, and I think that we as an organization do a lot of hard work to ensure that our budget is transparent and easily understandable by the public. It's not interesting, I can tell you that, based on the number of members of the public we see here, but it is very important work, and I do agree with you, Your Worship, or Mayor Borman, that the 2-year budgeting makes it easier to track what's happening, and it allows you to see process or progress of projects in particular that happen over a couple of years. So I'll be happy to support this operating budget with its amendments. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks. Is there further discussion on the motion to approve the 2020 operating budget amendments as presented? See no further discussion. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move that council approve the 2020 capital budget amendments as presented. I will also support this motion for very similar reasons to those that I spoke to a moment ago. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. At this point, I will call a short break, 15 minutes, and then we'll be back for the fire hall location discussion. Back to order, and we'll move on to item H3, the fire hall location. Chief Gaylor.
Mayor and Council, good morning, and thank you very much for taking a bit of time to hearing this request for decision. I'll read the recommendation, and then I have a few slides just to take us through the conversation, if that's appropriate. So today we're before you looking for a recommendation that Council direct administration to proceed with the design of an 8-bay fire hall with storage and training along Palliser Trail at the site as identified in the Canmore Fire Hall Study Attachment 1 to replace the current fire hall. There we go, sorry about that. And that Council direct administration to consider opportunities for future affordable housing projects as part of the design of the fire hall. We'll go over a little bit of background on that, but before I just step off this slide, I'm wondering if on that second recommendation on further examination of it and some feedback that we may expand it slightly. I think if the recommendation speaks to the possibility of affordable housing within the fire hall project itself, but that may be slightly limiting. There's some other very interesting possibilities that might be incorporated into the fire hall itself. But I would suggest that that large parcel of land, we should be looking at opportunities within that area for affordable housing. So it'd be sort of a two-part situation there. One refers to the building itself, the other to the area around it. The Group 2 report that is before you as well does speak to that somewhat. So I don't know if there's an official process around that. I just want to put it on the table that second bullet really refers to all opportunities that we could use for the building and the land itself to create a bit of a community hub in that area.
Great, thank you. We can deal with that when we come to the motions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor. Yeah. Okay, just a very quick review of where we've been and where we're going. This project has been underway for a number of years now, and I really like the systematic approach that the Town and Council is taking toward it. I think we could go as far back, if not further, to 2016 with a Marshall Titmore review about spatial needs study, and at that time I believe it identified the fire hall as the #1 priority on the inventory list of our buildings for the town to look at. That was followed by the Dillon Consulting Fire Rescue Master Plan. I think 2017, the second phase came out, again spoke to looking at the infrastructure for the fire service, particularly around the fire hall. And then finally the Group 2 Fire Hall Canmore Fire Hall Study Summary Report, which again recommends two options to proceed with a fire hall location. Within that report, they recommended two options. The option 1 was to build fire hall #1 in a short term, 3 to 5 years, vacating the current building for repurposing or sale, and build fire hall #2 in 30 years or close to build out. That is the option that administration is recommending. The second option they contemplated was build fire hall #2 in a short term, 3 to 5 years, and renovate the current building until the fire hall #1 is built in 30 years or close to build out. In a nutshell, the report recommends a 2 fire hall solution for the town of Canmore in a 30 to 50 year window. And given that we have physical constraints on how large the town can actually ever grow, a 2 fire hall solution at most would be the answer for the town of Canmore. Really, the question is down to what order do we do that? And to that point, administration is recommending option #1, which is the Palliser site. And that's really due to a long-term cost analysis, flexibility associated with staffing, and potential service level increases. There has been some more discussion around that in the report that we submitted, but that's basically it in a nutshell. There are some advantages about looking at option #1. It frees up the existing hall to be repurposed or sold, which I think might provide some interesting opportunities. There's some preliminary work ongoing in the background around the value of that property and what options might be available for that. It's also interesting to, by just replacing the current fire hall, let the town grow and let the town tell us where the actual growth nodes are. There's a lot of interest in, obviously, Stewart Creek and Three Sisters, but there's just as much interest in the Silvertip area. So by not committing to the second fire hall immediately, we allow the town's development to help guide us into the future a bit. We took a look at some alternatives. We could look at option #2. If we go that direction, which is building the second fire hall in the Three Sisters area first, we'd need some further studies. There are some undermining issues on the site that has been selected we would need to address. That'd be the number one thing that I would recommend we would have to look at on that. It would also commit us, not necessarily absolutely commit us to, but we need to look at staffing with that fire hall at the same time. It reduces a little bit of flexibility in how we would look at staffing fire halls. And alternatively, council may consider delaying the fire hall project altogether. There is the risk, though, of that compounding the challenges that exist in the current location. And with the current staffing model, there may be a negative impact on overall service levels just due to congestion and call volumes going forward. But we certainly do present those as two alternatives for council's consideration. Some financial impacts, they have been looked at. The finance department, through the manager, has done a bit of a deep dive on what's the overall horizon financial impact on that. In a nutshell, over the 50 years of the two fire hall solution, there's not a lot of price difference between the two options. Option number one being very slightly expensive over time. I believe in our strategic session, we discussed a lot of the detail around that piece, but just at a high level, the mountaintop of that is that over the 30-year window of building two fire halls and staffing it for the town of Canmore, the pricing works out to be roughly the same. As far as finance goes, there are $900K approved by council in the 2020 capital budget for design, detailed design around a new fire hall. Pending or based on recommendations or direction given by council today, we would move ahead with either option number one or option number two. We feel the $900K will go a long way to getting us close to a detailed design. We won't know the exact impact of that until we're well into that project, but I think we're fairly close on that. We will be using that for master planning, conceptual design, and I think we're fairly confident that we can get quite deep into detailed design on an actual building that's tenderable with that budget. Beyond that, in the 2021, we have $12 million in the capital budget for construction. There's the indication from the study that that is a slightly low estimate. They are pegging more around the $13.4 to $14 million mark. Design work that we would carry on in 2020 will again go a long way to recommend or to guide us where those numbers should be. Now, obviously, there are opportunities for us to help guide that budget depending really what the final plate of options look like. The base model, I think we're going to be comfortable with, but there's lots of decision points along the way through next year that we may want to consider, green energy, etc. So that's a bit the sort of the high overview of the financial impacts. Our stakeholder engagement, we feel we're fairly robust on this. Internally, we basically touched every department into the town. They were at the table through the whole process of compiling the report. And externally, the Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association had the opportunity to meet with the consultant team individually to provide their initial impacts, their inputs to that. And we are making sure that the MD of Bighorn is provided updates as this is moving along, in that we contract our services to them and we provide fire services to them in two of their areas. So we just want to make sure they're fully looped in on this project. Just a really high level where we're talking about, what it looks like for option number one. I just started with a big overlay of the town. The big red X there is the location that we're contemplating. Really the challenge with Canmore is the nodes. It's a really long, narrow, spread out community. The nice thing about this option is it puts us on a major artery, and we're able to run southeast towards those developments down Highway 1, and that's usually a quick access route. Same with we're right on top of getting into the other areas on the northeast side of the valley. So that's the general overview where it looks like in the main master map of the town. The second fire hall is contemplated at this point, and that would be a future case decision, is contemplated in the Three Sisters area, right in this area in here. But for this discussion, for this request for decision, the red X is what we're looking at. Zooming in a little bit, that's the site plot right there. There's a parking lot roughly, that's the X there is in that general area is where the consultants contemplated that land, just adjacent to the Holiday Inn. There's conversations already starting with Holiday Inn and what that looks like in a partnership, and making sure that the property lines are all sorted out. It's a nice size parcel of land that provides some really interesting opportunities beyond the fire hall. So I think there's some great opportunities for the town to look at for there.
Do you mind if we ask questions during your
presentation?
Oh,
of course, yes.
So just in thinking of that location, curious if there's an ability, when a call comes in, say the call is in this part of Canmore, so there's an option from that location to get to the rest of Canmore across the railway, either through by the Parkway or the direct route. Is there currently, or is there a possibility of some sort of a informational network so that the fire hall, your department is aware of the train schedule and can say, okay, we know there's going to be a train in 5 minutes, we better go through Three Sisters, or we know the rail is going to be clear for the next 20 minutes, we can take that route?
That's a great question. I'm glad you raised it because it's an interesting question. I've had some experience with CP and CN in my previous role, and if anybody's worked a lot with the train companies, they know they're big, powerful. It's a challenging group to work with. Getting their exact how did I do there? That is so kind. Oh, challenge is good. Opportunity, they say. There's opportunity there. I believe there would be the possibility to get notification on when a train is coming through. And that would be a partnership. That would be something that I would really like to pursue because I think that's important for the whole town on a lot of different levels. I am almost certain we will never find out what's on the train. That is a really trade secret piece there. But to find out when the train is coming is very interesting. There may be engineered solutions that we could employ that don't even involve the railway. If we had triggers upstream, downstream on the tracks, basically like wildlife cameras, and we know one is inbound, say, I don't know, 5 minutes or 3 minutes upstream either way. You know, we may be able to engineer a solution to get that notification. I would prefer to have it right from CP, frankly, but we would absolutely research that further.
Great,
if we were trapped by a train, we have 3 options. One is to wait, which is quite often what happens. But from that location, we could hit the highway either way, hit an overpass and come in. It does push back the response time a little bit, but it's still within range. But we'll follow that up for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Mara, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just saying, you said it would cut back your response time, but it also having your responders be able to come in to an area that's not congested would also sort of be, would it equal what you do now? Because you have to have 4 on the truck before you leave?
Right. What we're hoping for by this location, quite frankly, is that our responders living, some work downtown for sure, but by and large they come from external areas, and nobody lives downtown particularly. With this location, responders coming to the fire hall will be coming into a less congested area, so we're hoping that increases that turn a little bit. As far as the fire truck responding to a call, I think you have more options if you're coming from a non-congested site trying to get into a congested area rather than being trapped in a congested area, which is what we're seeing a little bit at this point, particularly over the summer months. We know the town gets really tight downtown, and it's tricky to get out, and I would much rather be on the outside trying to get in because we have more options. Does that answer your question? Great, thank you. We're good? So zooming in just a little bit further on this plot of land, this was a snapshot from the report itself. It just shows some of the opportunities on that site and gives a little different view of it. We have to do a little bit of work on packaging the land. There's a little bit of provincial land in there and some urban reserve. I believe planning has indicated that that work is started and underway, and we don't see any significant roadblocks at this point. And then sort of right down onto the lot itself. That's how, and again, this is just a rendering, a contemplation to give an idea. We could go pretty much any direction that makes the most sense, and perhaps with some council direction as well. But basically that's the fire hall, the white box sitting there with parking, et cetera, and a training area at the back end of the fire hall here, this area here. This is the main building here, parking, et cetera, and this is access to the hotel over here. All this parcel of land is actually a good size area. There's some really interesting, I think, opportunities for the town going forward. The fire hall would only need that portion of the land. We have talked to planning already, and I don't have the number right on hand, but there's a significant inventory of stock left for the cemetery area for the town. So that doesn't stop dead. There is still opportunity in there while providing opportunity for affordable housing or whatever project the town feels would be a good fit there. So just a quick snapshot of that, and then just drill right down into the building itself. Again, purely a contemplation, just to give you an idea of the direction we're going. This fire station would be 2 stories on this side, and this would be the apparatus bay where all the fire trucks live. It's 4 double-wide bays, and the bays are extra wide just to accommodate all the vehicles. We are extremely constrained on storage for all of our equipment right now, and this would solve that issue well into the future. This side of the building is generally always deemed the mechanical side. If future state, this is just the 2nd story, future state is interested, you could add fire halls on the other side of the mechanical spine. Basically, most fire halls, or industrial buildings, frankly, but most fire halls are 3 boxes. How you dress them up is strictly up to you. You have a residential box, an apparatus bay, storage box, and a mechanical box. So in a nutshell, that's it. It would be a drive-through bay with the residential offices. Operations will be on the 1st floor, and the 2nd floor would be the administration group. And all this space in here provides opportunity. And that would be something that we would look through the design stage. What things would the town and council be interested in contemplating in that space? We refer to it as shell space. Right now in the budget, it's unfinished space, but with a budget amendment, it could become whatever we would imagine. There's been some really interesting news reports. We'll forward it after a meeting about some other things that have been tried in other communities, which would be kind of interesting.
Councillor McCallum, did you have a question?
I did. Could you go back a slide,
certainly.
Chief Gaylor? So my question is that within the TIPP 20 project, there is plans for a bicycle lane, I believe, right along here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that the fire hall will be able to interface with that use without much issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. And the reason I say that confidently is that we had the exact scenario in a previous fire hall I worked with on a very busy bike commuter lane. We feel the sightlines will be good enough, it will not be an issue, but we could also engineer a solution on that to protect the cyclist, including something along the lines of a stoplight, frankly. If the truck is coming out in an emergency manner, you could put up a little stoplights on the bike path to just warn the commuters that a truck is coming through. Frankly, all non-emergency traffic in and out of that hall, it's incumbent upon our drivers to provide clearance to the bike path and the pedestrian path first. So I'm fairly confident we could mitigate that risk. It's a great question, though, because that is running right along there. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
In fact, we hope that we like to see traffic along there. I really do see fire halls as a community hub, and as much as that area continues to develop, we consider it to be a public building and an open building. So we hope somebody rides by and pops in every so often.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Chief Gaylor, before you leave that slide, can I just ask you a question about access to the site? Does everything have to go through that access road that's currently there?
This one here?
Yeah.
At this point, this is the way it's drawn, yes.
And
Yeah.
so if there was any future development on the areas around that building, how would you incorporate access to those areas?
Right. This would be, again, just conceptual at this point, and we could certainly adjust something along this line. This is just a contemplation by the consultant, but our planning department has had a quick look at this already. This would be a major entry. It'd be basically like a town street going in, and it would provide full access to the cemetery. There'd be a parking area along this line, and if you had a unit here of folks, this would be their entry and exit. Chances are very good by access codes, we would have an emergency access at this point, so the buildings are protected properly. That would not affect our operations at all, because the majority of the fire hall business will be happening here. But when you come in just to the back area for the fire hall, we would use the same access roads the public would. We would just turn into here for this parking. The public would just carry on to whatever business they have in this area.
So you have to design something for access to the cemetery out of that location as well then?
Yep. Yeah, that's the original contemplation. Absolutely subject to adjustment throughout the design phase over the next year.
Because the further you come down this area, the steeper it gets, because it berms it goes into the overpass berm around there.
Right as you're carving down in here, there is quite a bit of grade change. Yeah. Again, engineering and planning have had a quick look at that. There will be some cut and fill going on in there to provide good spaces in there. The original contemplation for the fire hall in this location, exact location, was it was a little easier to access Palliser here. You know, if it comes back and saying it needs to be 30 meters down a little bit, we'll just engineer the accesses and make that happen.
Okay, so the highest priority is getting those fire trucks out fast, and then everything else builds around it. Okay.
Yep. And when in the emergency response phase, they will be in the building here and they will come out this way. That route there, not impeding upon this at all. I do like the way this is laid out a bit, because as the truck comes out, and by far the majority they'll be heading this way. I mean, occasionally north, but coming down this way, it keeps all that activity away from the hotel, which is nice too. We'll be pointing down and out. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Did somebody over there have a point? Let's get right there. We go.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I just wanted to remind Council these are excellent questions and a good discussion. This is a conceptual design. It could change substantially between now and the actual detailed design. So we will definitely take this information away as helpful input. But just keep in mind when you're looking at this, it's a very conceptual design. The whole actual, what we end up with, could look very different than this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, and that really just brings us to the questions. This is a quick snapshot of the request for decision. There's the fire hall study was attached, I believe, to your package. It's a substantial document. I suspect you're probably getting tired of seeing it, but you have it again, so there you go. And I'm happy to take any questions or concerns on this motion.
Thanks very much. And as with, it seems, all agenda items today, this is part of a discussion that has been growing for several years. And certainly there's been a number of opportunities for council to get updates and ask questions and become fully informed. And I appreciate all of that informational sharing and the work that administration you've done in response to questions over the last year or more on this project. I do have a few questions. One is sort of out of left field, and I gather this is fairly recent, and I'm just curious, it has to do with new fire underwriters insurance or something. Do you know about that?
I'm familiar with the organization. It's a third-party organization that sets insurance rates for municipalities. We have a current rating laid out by a fire underwriter survey from a few years ago. I let them do their business.
Right.
How this fire hall location change would affect that wouldn't be determined until the fire underwriters would do a new survey of the town. We're fairly confident that moving it won't degrade or substantially upgrade those ratings.
Right. And I know from the details in the report that specifically the locations that are under consideration, the Palliser site and the Three Sisters site, and I, at least those two scored the best in regards to response time, and as compared to the existing fire hall, which in that same test scored fairly poorly. Mm-hmm. Looking at that on section 3.1 in the report. So in regards to the effect of in the future on insurance, and I gather that that report is specific to commercial insurance, it would seem to me that if the location of the fire hall, given the information we have, wouldn't have any direct negative effect to that study or to that scoring.
Mm-hmm. I would certainly agree, Mayor. Sorry to interrupt. They do refer generally to commercial rates, but they do have a residential rating system as well that's based on a 1 to 5 point system. The commercial is based on a 1 to 10 point system. There are two categories within that. They tend to focus on the commercial rating slightly higher, but they certainly have a residential rating system as well. To echo your point, particularly on the commercial rating side, that fire hall move potentially will slightly decrease our response times, increasing our level of service. So that should, if anything, have a positive impact on those ratings. Mm-hmm. I can't anticipate any reason why it would have a negative impact.
Mm-hmm. And we've learned quite clearly over the conversations that the existing location continues to become more constrained, given it's pretty much in the core of the town. It's off. So as I say, we're aware that the current location is constrained in regards to access and will continue to become more constrained. So arguably over time, the existing location could potentially show a longer response time.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's just a matter of time before we start to actually notice a response time increase, just particularly through, I'm going to say, the May to September, October months, and then right around the Christmas peak season to the ski season. We do really feel that constraint.
I also wanted to pick up on something in the report around regarding option 1, and the report notes that there's some wisdom in building the full replacement hall first. That's the hall you're recommending for Palliser, given the uncertainty of long-term community development. So arguably, again, because we don't know what will happen in the future, but if there was the decision to build the 4-bay hall in Three Sisters now and upgrade the existing location, it might be that development in that part of town of Canmore doesn't proceed to the extent that it's imagined it might, in which case then we've committed to that, whereas it might not be required, and then at that point we may need to build the other hall anyways. So I'm understanding that this is a bit of a cautionary approach to build the location of the Palliser and wait and see in 20 or 30 years if a second hall really is required. Is that reasonable characterization of the conversation?
Absolutely, sir. I think that sums it up very nicely. By doing the Palliser location first, it provides us more flexibility and options. And by locating it on a major artery like number 1, etc., it does provide good access to that neighborhood to south of us, to the Stewart Creek area already. So it does provide us more flexibility, and by building fire hall number 2 first, we are somewhat committed. So I would completely agree with your assessment on that. Yes, sir.
In regards to impact on staffing, I understand that if we built the 4-bay hall in Three Sisters and then upgraded the downtown hall, it would require pretty much immediately at least a doubling of staffing.
Yes, sir.
Whereas the approach you're recommending, it may be that in the future there'll be requests for increased staffing in the Palliser hall or an 8-bay hall, but it's not mandatory initially. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Another nice option about doing the Palliser location is that we can carry on with our business as usual in a more appropriately located infrastructure that's good for the next 50 years. And our staffing models, which there may be recommendations coming forward to investigate, could be done in stages and steps with more creativity and more opportunity for flex staffing, doing in steps or stages, et cetera, as we move through the next few years. Whereas if we build a second fire hall, I think we'd be pretty much committed to staffing it fully right off the bat, and maintaining staffing in the downtown fire hall. So that could represent an awfully big commitment right off the bat. Whereas, so again, your summary is exactly how we see it as well.
Great. I'm sure other councillors have questions about this project this time, but I have no more. We have seen it before. It's not the first go-around. So if there's no questions at this time for the chief, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
So there's 2 recommended motions, and I'll present them separately. I'll bring the first one to the table first, and then the second one I'll bring, but I'll suggest that I modify that motion a little bit to reflect what the chief said at the beginning of the presentation. So at this point, I'll move the council direct administration to proceed with the design of an 8-bay fire hall with storage and training along Palliser Trail at the site as identified in the Canmore Fire Hall Study, Attachment 1, to replace the current fire hall. And that, I'll have that motion on the table. And then bring the second motion forward to post this. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I'd be happy to support this motion. I believe that I was actually commenting to Chief Gaylor yesterday that this process has not been rushed at all. It's been something that we've had quite a bit of time to contemplate, and from the beginning of our study to where we are right now. Choosing the Palliser site makes a lot of sense from a variety of positions, all of which are outlined in the report. But I think that it also has the opportunity to provide an anchor for what I see it in the future as being an amazing neighborhood over in the Palliser. And it would be great to see a public building over in that area. I also am pleased to see the inclusion of the possibility of co-location of other uses, whether it be affordable housing or perhaps items that are outlined within our spatial needs study. And so based on that and a lot of reasons that are outlined in the report, I'll be happy to support this.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your hard work, everyone, on this. I will support option 1 on the Palliser for many reasons. One, because it addresses our current issues in the summer months and busy weekends. As we know, our shoulder season is expanding. I like that we will also allow for more training and storage options, because I know we're constrained where we are now. I've toured the fire hall, and I've seen their little area that, wow, I don't know how they do what they do in there, especially with storage tanks for their breathing apparatuses. And I like the fact that they've thought of how they will phase in their staff. And I think the report itself is self-explanatory, so I definitely will support option 1 at Palliser.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support option 1. When we first started this process, I was considering option 2, and I thought that had some merit from a community safety perspective. But we've worked through all that, and I really like option 1 now. So it's easy to support, and staffing models and everything else as the community grows, I think it'll put us in good position. So.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support this recommendation. I know that when this first came forward, there was equal consideration of both option 1 and option 2. And there were pros and cons to both sides. So I think just having the opportunity to take the time to think this through and to have the fire department really look carefully at which direction we need to go. I think getting the current fire hall out of downtown is probably the best route to go, both from the community aspect and from the fire hall aspect. So I would be happy to support this recommendation.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I will also support this option. It's all been said already, so I'll just leave it at that.
I also will be happy to support the motion, and I really appreciate the slow and careful approach that administration has taken in moving this forward. It's been really comprehensive. This is not a simple project to initiate in any way, and it's certainly a lot of money. We're looking at anywhere from $20 to $25 million or more over the years, so it's something that council has to be very careful about considering and approving. I agree with the position that other councillors have expressed, that ultimately this is really about the long-term safety of our community. I'm pretty sure that nobody in Canmore would disagree that a fully functional fire hall is pretty important to our community, and it's pretty clearly evident that the fire hall that was built, I guess 40 years ago now, has run its life, and the location simply the challenges of maintaining the operation in that location are far more difficult than I think it's worth putting money into. And we do have the option, if this moves forward, to either sell that property, which would offset the capital costs of the project, or repurpose that property into a much needed increased space housing for, well, it could be housing, but space for town staff and perhaps community groups. So that could become a valuable community asset with a completely different purpose. So again, I'll add my thanks to everybody in the administration, Chief, your work for bringing this forward as you have, and we'll be happy to support the motion. With that, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And the next motion I will modify from what was recommended in the report to include other possibilities. And if Councillor wants to amend that, that could be an amending motion. But I'll move that Council direct administration to consider opportunities for future affordable housing and or other possibilities as part of the design of the fire hall. And look for discussion on that motion. Councillor McCallum.
I appreciate, as I said earlier, that this being made part of the motion. As you know, that this is something that I've been passionate about, is ensuring that we consider future co-location of our facilities with other town uses, whether it be affordable housing primarily, but if there are other needs that we see in the community that could be fulfilled as land is not plentiful. So I would be happy to support this motion. Thank you.
There's no further discussion on the motion. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I think we have time to consider item H4, Canmore Eagles Financial Performance and Sustainability. Mr. McKay.
Perfect. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Pleased to speak with you today about the Canmore Eagles, their financial performance, and also having a look at sustainability for this organization and their interaction with the town moving forward. We'll cover a variety of topics, all of which end up related close to the end today. So I'd like to start with a little background and history to remind you about the Canmore Eagles Association or organization. Review the accounts payable repayment agreement and the status of that agreement, as well as give you a summary of how other municipalities are providing support for their AJHL teams, and then have a discussion regarding the Canmore Recreation Centre Lifecycle Maintenance Project, how the scope was changed in the early stages of that project and some impacts that had, as well as give you an update on some revenue related to sponsorship agreements at the Canmore Recreation Centre, and then provide some recommendations for some motions. So as I'm sure you're aware, the Canmore Eagles Hockey Club has existed in the town of Canmore for quite some time, since the mid-90s, and currently plays in the Alberta Junior Hockey League. They provide a variety of community building opportunities and benefits. So in addition to hosting games, which are important community building events for residents of the town, they also work with our sport groups in town, namely Canmore Minor Hockey, to improve the experience of local participants. They exist with a great amount of volunteer effort, some very, very committed people as part of that organization. And they have experienced some financial challenges during their time in Canmore. The accounts payable repayment agreement. So this agreement was renewed in 2018, summer 2018, where Council directed administration to enter into a new repayment agreement because some of the terms of the previous agreement had been violated. Essentially, the level of indebtedness had reached the ceiling of what was prescribed by the previous agreement, and so we entered into a new agreement. What did remain consistent was that that new agreement, just like the old one, required the retirement of debt that the Eagles have with the town by 2024. Fast forward from July 2018 to the summer of 2019, and we encountered some challenges with compliance with the terms of our new agreement. And that led to us issuing a notice of default on September 15th, or following the passing of the September 15th deadline. After we issued that notice of default, there were a few payments that were made. The outstanding portion of the 2018-2019 facility use fees, the next day, September 16th, the annual interest on the deferred ice rental fees, shortly later on September 25th, and the Canmore Eagles remained in default of the agreement until just recently when they made the minimum payment towards the deferred fees of $10,000 on November 21st. All that to say, currently, the Eagles are no longer in default of the agreement, and their current debt sits at $107,000 with the town. You can see one of the recommendations in the report is to make some amendments to the accounts payable repayment agreement. And that really has to do with the ongoing fees that the Canmore Eagles pay for use of the Canmore Recreation Center. When it comes to the deferred fees, we have clear dates and expectations for payment towards the debt. Significant flexibility exists for ongoing facility usage fees. And administration has been flexible with the Eagles in their payment dates and amounts. But we're suggesting that by putting some parameters around the flexibility that administration can provide, it'll allow us to clearly enforce the agreement and provide clarity to all the parties involved. I'll move on to give you, unless you guys wish to ask questions as we go, I'll move on to providing a summary of what other municipalities are providing their AJHL teams in the form of support. So administration conducted a survey of municipalities that are home to AJHL teams to understand the different levels of support that are being provided. And we found a few important things. One being that 5 of the 15 teams in the AJHL have a loan from the municipality, which they're repaying at various rates. So Canmore isn't alone in having an amount owing from their AJHL team. We also found that annual financial support from municipalities ranges from $0 a year up to $60,000 a year from the municipality. And this kind of support takes a number of forms. It could be in the form of waiver of fees. It could be in the form of grants, or not charging interest on loans. Is the types of support that we're referring to there. We also had a look at Canmore's ice rental fees, facility use fees, compared to those in various municipalities with AJHL teams. And we found that many of our fees are in line or comparable within the league. But one important fee, namely the hourly ice rental fee for games, is notably higher than it is within the rest of the league. So 17 to 22% higher based on if you're using the average or the median of the survey. Currently, the town of Canmore does a number of things to support our AJHL hockey team, the Canmore Eagles. We allow the club to operate with a significant debt to the town, so $107,000. We lease dressing room and office space to the club for a fairly nominal fee. We also provide either low or no cost service for things like facility setup, game logistics, as well as the installation of ice logos and arena board advertising. We've also been billing the club for facility usage in a way that allows them to manage their cash flow. So providing some flexibility around paying ongoing fees as opposed to the net 30 that's otherwise fairly common. We've also taken steps to connect the Eagles with the Hockey Canada Foundation, who's able to provide a tax receipt for donations that the Eagles may receive for members of the public. And then also the town has made some infrastructure investments, some large ones within the Canmore Recreation Centre, which certainly are benefiting the Eagles as well as the variety of other user groups who utilize that facility. Moving on to the Canmore Recreation Centre Lifecycle Maintenance Project. As I mentioned, the facility is looking great, and already users are getting benefit from that project. Generally quite happy with how it's turned out. If we think back to the discussion of scope and budget around that project, we can remember that initially a permanent bar within the Canmore Recreation Centre and room 230 was included, and I believe the price tag was close to $20,000 for that amenity. During value engineering that occurred through the budgeting process for that project, it was removed to manage costs. Subsequently, the Canmore Eagles have indicated that they're concerned that beverage revenue generated from games and beverage sales will suffer without a more functional, more permanent bar amenity. The Eagles have gone out and secured some in-kind donations to assist with the construction of a bar in that space, and if that's something that is chosen to go ahead with, construction of such a bar would benefit not only the Eagles but other user groups within that facility for various events. Also, to provide some context around a potential funding source for such a bar, there's been sponsorship agreements secured for various amenities within the Canmore Recreation Centre, and namely those take the forms of dressing room and meeting room naming rights. Signed contracts are anticipated to generate $20,000, with $12,000 of that $20,000 already received. So with $8,000 to be received over the next few years.
Do you mind if I interrupt with a question?
Mm-hmm.
So that is, those funds are received by the town or by the Eagles?
Yeah, good question. So those funds to the town. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that takes us to the recommendations that are included in the agenda package there. The first one being to amend the 2018 accounts payable repayment agreement, and I'd suggest as presented in the agenda package. A summary of those amendments is provided here. Essentially, we look to make clear requirements for the club to pay all fees associated with a previous hockey season before starting a new season. And that's defined by the club's fiscal year. So essentially their fiscal year would end on June 30th, and before August 1st of the following fiscal year, so just essentially 30 days later, all fees would need to be paid associated with the previous year. And so we define that fiscal year within the amending agreement. We've also had some feedback that 30 days to provide an audited financial statement is quite tight for the club, so we've suggested that their annual audited financial statement be due after 90 days. So more of an administrative change, but a change to the agreement nonetheless. We'd also like to define a street address that allows for the delivery of registered mail, as delivering a notice of default to a PO box can be rather difficult. So just again, another administrative type change to the agreement that was approved. The second recommendation is to utilize $10,000 to construct a bar in room 230 and to fund that by sponsorship agreements for the Canmore Recreation Center received in 2019 within town operations. So the Canmore Eagles have generated in-kind donations, which has been able to take care of some of the initially anticipated cost with this amenity, which was initially estimated at $20,000, which would mean the residual being $10,000 could come from these agreements. And then finally, the third recommendation is to reduce the Eagles facility rental rates by $8,500 per year. Why $8,500? That would bring their game rental rate fee to the median within the league. And so that would be the reduction that they would see in their fees and that the town would see in its revenue.
So that number there, that game rental rate is separate from other fees?
Yes, so we have a variety of fees, whether it be for a non-prime time, say practice, a room rental. We found that generally speaking, those other fees are relatively in line with the AJHL and what other teams are paying. The anomaly was the game fee, which is why we're suggesting a change there.
Thank you.
And then I'm happy to take any questions that the council might have.
Well, thanks for that report. Just in regards to the proposal for the bar in room 230, I'm assuming room 230 is the big space between the two arenas?
Yes, thanks. Right. Thank you for clarifying. It's the viewing space above the two arenas.
And I'm visualizing it'd be a permanent installation that would be fixed?
That's correct.
Right. Similar to what was there previously in the Lady McDonald room?
Mm-hmm. I do believe it would end up being a smaller square footage, but provide similar functionality.
Great. And then it would be available to all user groups or renters of that space?
That's correct. So that amenity would be the town's amenity, and would be something that we would rent out through our facility bookings department as requested.
Great. And I have a question about you mentioned that you've assisted the Eagles in connecting with tax receipt opportunity. I don't recall the organization you mentioned.
The Hockey Canada Foundation.
Right. So to your knowledge, then the Eagles have connected with that group and everything is in place, so they have that opportunity now?
That's my understanding.
Convoluted system we're trying.
Presumably that'll be sorted out in the near future. Great. Councillor Sanford, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation. With the bar as a permanent installation, Council has had the opportunity to tour the Canmore Rec Centre as it's been developing or redeveloping. And so I've seen the configuration of the space. Is there some consideration of partitioning that bar off so it's not actually part of the room if it's when not in use?
So when it comes to the construction of the bar, the thought is that it would be a permanently enclosed space, its own locked door, but it would take up some of the square footage within that space. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
But it's not overtly a bar all the time. It'll be, they had some roller blinds or something on the previous configuration of the bar.
Correct. So it would be secured.
Yeah.
So it couldn't be accessed without a key. You couldn't hop the counter or anything anything like
Right.
that.
So I'm just thinking, because that space was going to be used as a fitness room and dancing and all kinds of things. So the bar wouldn't be like an overt feature of that room. It would be sort of subdued when not in use?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. We would intend to match specifications so it essentially it matches the rest of the space. It's not a potential eyesore or it doesn't yell bar.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's going to be used for fitness purposes, it just doesn't feel right to have a bar in there if that's what the use of it.
I think I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds to me as though you're suggesting it's important that it fits within the space. And,
right. And when not in use, it's a little bit low key for that space.
Yes.
Because they're going to use it between games and open it all up, and I mean during games and that sort of thing. So, with your suggestion of reducing the fees by $8,500 per year, are you considering charging the current fees and then subtracting $8,500? Is that how you plan to do it? Because you've got hourly rates for rooms and games and...
So I would see us adjusting the rate, which would have an $8,500 impact.
Okay.
But if for some other reason we wanted to structure that differently, to essentially communicate the benefit that's being received, we could do that.
So you're going to give them a reduced rate on the use that they're currently having, or just reduce it by $8,500, whatever they're using?
Our intention would be to adjust the rate, as opposed to, say, adjust the rate moving forward, as opposed to provide an annual discount.
Okay, yeah. But they're using a variety of services in that building, right, that they're being charged for?
That's correct. And those other services, based on the survey, we're not charging significantly more, significantly less than what other AJHL teams are paying. And so we're looking to address just the one anomaly based on the survey results.
Okay, and you provided a chart in the in the agenda package, so that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
Could you just go back to your slide that details the amendments to the accounts payable repayment agreement? Thanks. So, thinking forward, the first bullet, pretty straightforward. And in the case of not meeting that requirement, what does administration do?
So what this would do is it would clearly indicate that there's been an event of default, and then the agreement outlines the procedure for how to deal with that. So a letter of default would be issued. The organization would have 5 days to correct that default, and then the agreement outlines what would occur if that default's not corrected, which really goes into being removed from the facility from a lease perspective, not being able to operate, and the debt being due at that point.
I'm thinking back to one of the earlier discussions at council around this specific issue, and part of the discussion was acknowledging the fact that the Eagles have assets just in regards to having the franchise in the club.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the facts that supported council back then in proceeding with that. And I just assume that that asset is still in place for the Eagles and continues to give them some sort of financial strength.
As far as the value of the franchise is concerned, it's difficult to pinpoint a precise value of that franchise. But what we can say is, recently in BC, a franchise was sold for $1.2 million. So using that as a temperature gauge, I suggest we're well positioned to collect if we needed to.
Right. Councillor McCallum?
You wouldn't sell like an Alberta, this is how much I know about hockey. Enough to be dangerous. You wouldn't sell a Alberta franchise to a BC community.
No.
But you're just saying that, like, yeah, sort of
value.
apples and bananas-ish.
Yes.
Okay.
What I guess it's a similar level of hockey in a neighboring province, which is why we use it as a comparator. What I can say is, in the summer of 2018, we did have indication that franchises had been recently sold in Alberta for around $800,000.
Okay. All right, that's a more helpful number, I think. Thank you.
You bet.
There are other questions at this time for Mr. McKay? Councillor Mara?
Thank you, Mayor Boardman. Thank you for your work on this with the Eagles. You've already had this discussion with the Eagles. Are they confident in that they could make their payment for September moving forward?
There's the payment that would be due in September is towards the fees that have been deferred, so the principal and interest on the $107,000 currently owing. I would say that payment typically has been made close to on time. So I have trouble, I guess, indicating the level of confidence the Eagles have to make that payment at that point. What I can say is a typical season for the ongoing fees that are billed for annual facility usage, most typically they're paid in advance of August 1st every year.
That's what I was really after. Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report and your ongoing work in addressing this particular issue and working with the Eagles board. I know that you both have been working really positively with the board, with the Eagles, to move this forward. So thanks for that. So there will be 3 separate motions for council to consider. And I'll put the first motion forward this time. I move the council direct administration to utilize $10,000 to construct a bar in room 230 to be funded by sponsorship agreements for the Canmore Rec Center received in 2019 within town operations. And speaking of that motion, I'll support the motion. It seems clear to me that that permanent bar in that facility would be, in essence, an improvement to the rec center and would benefit not only the Eagles, but other community groups and renters well into the future. So I'm quite supportive of moving forward that construction. Councillor Mara?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support this motion. I know that the construction of the bar is an integral part of the funding for the team. Knowing and having worked in the old one, I know that there's a lot of work just even a dedicated space, bringing in ice, beer, whatever goes in there. And I know that there's a value, and I know that people come just down to have a drink and to watch the game, so it increases their revenue. So I will support this.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I would be happy to support first motion. I believe that when we were discussing, when we finalized approval of the CRC renovations, this was something that was value engineered out, And there was a laundry list of things that we were hoping to insert back in to the project as time went on and as finances were made available. It's great to see that this is being used for sponsorship money, and I'm happy to see that the entire facility, that other users outside of the hockey club will be able to use that, therefore improving the space.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support this motion for a lot of the reasons that we've already heard. Permanent bar was engineered out, and it was originally considered, and I think it will assist the financial viability of the Eagles too, so I will support the motion.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. I'll then move that Council direct administration to reduce the Eagles facility rental rates by $8,500 per year. And I will support this motion as well. I think given the importance to many in the community of the Eagles Club, and given the tentative nature financially of the operation, it's a reasonable approach for the town to take to consider what the average or what other communities are charging for this fee and reflect the average. I think that's a reasonable approach. And I could speak to both this motion and the next one at the same time, and I will. So not only do I feel that's a reasonable approach in regards to working with the Eagles to improve their financial situation, I want to acknowledge that this has been a very difficult situation for many years. I would say particularly so for the Eagles Hockey Club. I know this has been something that has weighed heavily on the board particularly. And I want to make a point of noting that I've always known the board of the Eagles Hockey Club have always had the best intentions in this enterprise. And I also want to note my appreciation for how the town administration has continued to work in a positive way with the Eagles Club to try to find the way that this club can continue in our community. I know that it is an important group, an important opportunity for community members to have the junior hockey team here. I certainly hope that this puts everybody over the hump and this won't be coming back to council at any time for another revision. And in regards to the next motion, I'll speak to that while I have the mic. In the same vein, I think amending that motion in the way that you're recommending is reasonable. And will hopefully show the success that we've been looking for the last many years in finding the successful junior hockey team here in Canmore. Councillor Mera.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support both motions.
There's only one motion on the table.
Sorry, or speak to. I think everything we can do to support our local community groups, we need to try, and I appreciate the fact, knowing that both administration and the Canmore Eagles are working hard to put a successful product out there that is independent of finances from the town. I know personally that the Eagles board has tried many options and many ways of trying to raise funds. They've hit some obstacles along the way, and I feel that we can help them over, like you say, as this hump, and so I will support this motion.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I too will support the motion. I think what administration has brought forward to us to consider is a very good, robust palette of information that helps us make this decision. Up till now, anything to do with the Eagles was very specific to our community, but seeing what the landscape is for the AJHL teams across Alberta is very helpful and helps me support this motion the way it's stated. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. So I'll be happy to support this motion, and I will support the next one as well. I really do hope that these changes provide the level of success that the Eagles organization is looking for. I guess the only thing I really want to point out is we work really hard to be in the middle of the pack in terms of what we charge and our fees and everything else, but we are operating in the most expensive community in the province, and that makes it very, very difficult to be the middle of the pack financially when everything else is not at the middle of the pack, and the cost of land dictates everything to us. So I want to support and have supported in my decisions and motions or votes in the past the Eagles Hockey Organization, and I do hope these changes, again, lead them to the success that they're looking to achieve as an organization. That's all I have to say.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you. I too will support this this motion. I like how we got to the number. It's using a medium that's out there right now, and it helps a very important community partner. So I like the adjustment, and I think that will be a great deal of help. So thank you for doing that.
If there's no further discussion, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council direct administration to amend the 2018 accounts payable repayment agreement as presented. And although I did speak to this in a sense short while ago, I do want to also note in this conversation that there are regularly indirect subsidies for a number of other municipal or community groups through favorable fee structures or other options that we employ to continue to have a robust and healthy community and when it comes to recreational pursuits. But I will also reflect the sentiment that's been expressed that I'm really hopeful that this will be the tweak that puts the club over the top, and that there's no need to bring anything of this nature back to council, at least for the next 2 years.
That's pretty self-serving.
Is there other discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And given that we're past noon, I'll move the meeting be adjourned and restart. Shall we say at 1 o'clock? Is that time for everybody? Pardon me? It's a break. Not adjourned, it's a break. We'll take a break. It's kind of like adjourning, but that's okay.